Nightmares. The shadows that dance along and trace the corners of our minds. The mystery and meaning of them have eluded humanity since time immemorial, but in the world of little nightmares, nightmares aren't just a figment of imagination. They are a gateway to truly unspeakable horrors. Within the nowhere, many sleeping children have lost their way, crossed the threshold, and even had their innocence taken from them in moments of desperation. It's here, in the nowhere, amidst the twisted corridors, the circling cities, and the deepest oceans that we encounter these brave souls. Their names lost to the whispers of shadows, but their stories, no less important. So, I wanted to do a deep dive on each of these innocent, wandering children to see what drives them forth. Join me as we dive into the characteristics and lore of every child we know of that has wandered the nowhere. Our first young wanderer is Alone, which is kind of ironic because we've only known her as having a companion thus far. Also known as the girl with the pigtails, Alone wears a little lime-colored hazmat suit that covers her whole body, but leaves her hands and bare feet exposed. It's got 2 little brass buttons at the top and a leather belt strapped across her torso that she holsters a giant wrench in when she's not using it as a weapon or tool. Obviously, not much is known about her because she's one of the newest introductions to the Little Nightmares world, but we can draw a lot from just her physicality. She's quiet, like many other kids out in the nowhere. She seems to be compassionate toward other kids, and in an interview with the producer of Little Nightmares 3, she said, "Alone is a curious, incurable tinkerer who can't help following the secrets of the spiral to their source." The girl with the braids was introduced in the 3rd issue of the Little Nightmares digital comic series right before Little Nightmares 2 was released. She's a pale-skinned girl with long red hair into 2 braids and blunt bangs in front. She's introduced wearing a knee-length nightgown with a blood stain on the front due to her constantly bloody nose. When we first see the girl with the braids, she's digging profusely at the floor of what seems to be a cell. She uses her hands at first, but a blue light shines from under the door, and a spoon is slid under the gap. She uses that spoon to dig, but it eventually breaks, and yet another spoon is slid into her cell by the blue light. This happens like clockwork, and we see she starts a tally of how many spoons were given to her. She eventually digs down and back up, hoping to be free. But eerily, she digs right back up from the hole she started in the cell. As she looks around, the door surprisingly creaks open, and she creeps out. We see the doctor looming behind her up on the ceiling as if he was waiting for her. It is worth mentioning, as the girl digs a deep enough hole to enter, a dark figure can be seen watching her from the ceiling. It's speculated the dark figure hanging from the ceiling is actually the doctor, who has been secretly slipping her spoons under the door in order to observe her pointless efforts to escape. Noone is the main protagonist of the podcast, The Sounds of Nightmares. We never see Noone, except in the cover art, but it's still assumed that it's her. Noone, also known as Ruth, is a patient in the County Psychiatric Institute. She has lived a rather lonely and troubled life. No friends and timid in nature, Noone was the main target of bullying and ridicule at school. They gave her a nickname she would eventually reclaim as her own: No One. Noone fell ill with water sickness. It made her frail, and the mortality rate of this said disease was apparently very high, but she became a primary subject for a new treatment, one that would be the cure for this dangerous water sickness. After Noone was cured, she was thrown into the spotlight. Appearing on television regularly, this new fame started to change her life, and she became famous for the cure. The kids at school even treated her nicer, but although she was cured, she still felt something inside her body. Noone had no one to trust, so she kept this information to herself until she started having these truly terrible nightmares. She was admitted to the County Psychiatric Institute, where she was assigned treatment by a counselor named Otto. Ethan is a minor character that also has only appeared in the Little Nightmares podcast. In the 6th and final chapter, after Noone has disappeared and Otto, the counselor, is cleaning the mess in his office, Ethan startles him with the opening of his office door. Otto realizes Ethan is sleepwalking. There's no description or voice for Ethan, but he was a patient of the ward who should not be out of his room. But through his sleepwalking, he had been led to Otto's office. The counselor concludes this is a new development in Ethan, a new symptom. With Noone out of the picture entirely, this is an answer to Otto's prayers. Ethan will be his new experiment in finding a path to the nowhere. He invites the boy into his office and tells him how the two of them will dream over and over again, until they both sleep again. Lo is our second protagonist, also introduced in Little Nightmares 3. He's a short and thin boy whose upper face is hidden by a white raven mask. One eye is bigger than the other, which fits because he's an archer. Maybe it's for aiming purposes. He's got tattered shorts, a tan shirt, and a rope for a belt. He has his left arm wrapped, and he sports a blue cape with a beaded neon red and blue bracelet around one of his ankles. All that is known about Lo comes from the same interview with the producer of Little Nightmares 3. He's said to be obsessed with reaching a mythical place where he believes he will find a gateway leading home. He's lived in the spiral for many years and has never lost hope in finding a way home. He seems to have all the abilities of other protagonists in other games, but with the addition of mirror transportation. Lo can travel long distances through mirrors, similar to mono and TVs. Also, in trailers, gameplay, and screenshots, Lo can sometimes be seen looking at a piece of paper, possibly a map. Mono, our favorite, or not so favorite protagonist in Little Nightmares 2, is a small boy with a mysteriously big past. In terms of his looks though, he's instantly recognizable. I mean, he is the only one that wears a paper bag over his head. His slightly oversized trench coat with big buttons flows behind him and gives him a certain kind of scrappy look. Mono rarely speaks, but when he does, it's in short phrases. We play as Mono throughout Little Nightmares 2 and quite often see his determination to never give up. His official description indicates that the character is quite purposeful and stubborn in achieving his goals. And although I'd say he's shown to be noble, confident, and well-meaning, he does not hesitate to kill any foes who intend to hurt him or his new companion Six. As noted before, he has the ability to travel through televisions, but only if the linked TVs are turned on. Mono, through a surprising sequence of events, is revealed to be the Thin Man, one of the main villains in the game who controls the whole Pale City through hypnotizing television signals. I know there's many theories about Mono, but the most popular one, I'd say, is that the Thin Man and Mono exist in a time paradox, similar to Six and the Lady, but there are some points that could be said against this theory. The writer of Little Nightmares neither confirms nor denies whether the Thin Man is the predecessor of Mono or if they are the same individual. He simply states, it's all of that. Possibly the cutest creatures in all of Little Nightmares, Nomes inhabit a large amount of the nowhere. They've been seen in almost every bit of Little Nightmares content out there. Each look the same. Small, humanoid creatures with thin white skin and heads or hats that look like mushroom caps. They have large feet, but they scramble across the ground impressively fast. And finally, Nomes don't talk, but they give out these little croaks. So where do they come from? They seldom come in contact with anyone else besides their gnome brethren, but when they do, it's usually bad news. We learn firsthand how gnomes come to be in the Little Nightmares DLC, Secrets of the Mall. 6. Not to be confused with the girl in the yellow raincoat, is the protagonist in almost every Little Nightmares game we've played thus far. Six is the first character we also ever see in this strange world. We immediately notice she's much smaller than the adult characters in this world, being barely a third of their height. She's extremely small nevertheless, and she wears a bright yellow raincoat. Underneath that hood she usually keeps up is a messy black bob haircut with long bangs. Chronologically, the first time she's in the story, she actually doesn't even have the raincoat. But when it's found, she seems to have a serious connection to it. Other than her raincoat, her only possession is a Zippo lighter. Now, little is known about Six's past before the video games and comics events. but she refrains from talking about her past on purpose. It has been stated by the creators that she belongs elsewhere, implying that she used to live somewhere else before the events in the games and comics. She has an insatiable hunger. This endless desire for food starts after the Thin Man kidnaps her. He pulls her out of a room Mono is hiding in, only leaving glitching remains, or what we now call Dark Six. After some unfortunate events, that same Dark Six leads her physical counterpart to the mall. Her hunger is so lethal at times, she feasts on Nomes, a trapped rat, and bread given to her through iron bars. Speaking of which, the bread-giving boy is a minor but mysterious character seen in Little Nightmares 1 in the comics. A little boy in what looks like a cafeteria behind bars gives her his last remaining bread. Nothing is shared between the two in the game, and when Six is finished eating the bread, he sits back down at the table he was at before. But in the comics, he asks Six, "What's the last thing you remember? Tell me." She stays silent. "If you don't tell us, you're sure to forget altogether." Jester is another child briefly seen by Noone in The Sounds of Nightmares. He's a young boy who befriends her during her dream about the bathhouse. He's described as being grubby, wearing tatty shorts, and a shirt decorated in pin badges. When Noone tries to remember what he was like, she describes his personality as someone who likes and is always telling jokes. She also describes him as someone who lost parts of himself. When he would try to tell a joke, he'd always forget to deliver the punchline and then lose all expression in his face. Jester travels with Noone for a bit after encountering her on a rooftop and asking if she knew a way out of the bathhouse. In a very descriptive scene, Noone tells how she barely escapes from some of the bathers chasing them, but Jester wasn't so lucky. She recounts seeing Jester being used as a sponge on one of the bodies of the oversized adults, his body gone limp. The Fat Kid is a portly little guy with overalls, knee-high socks, and a classic short haircut. He's always been seen with a fairly large lollipop and always crying, or on the verge of tears. He's a character whose story is shown to us through the digital comics, although he does have a model found in the Little Nightmares 2 files. In the digital comics, though, we find him fighting the bullies we fought in Little Nightmares 2, and immediately recognize he's in the school. He fights multiple bullies reluctantly, tossing them off rooftops and smashing their porcelain heads with his lollipop, all while crying. But he hears some much larger footsteps and goes to hide in a nearby locker. Unlucky for him, it's the teacher, and she knows every trick in the book. The Flashlight Girl is a very minor but ultimately useful character seen at the beginning of Secrets of the Mall. She's a scrappy-looking girl with long brown hair, a dress, and a flashlight who seems to always be trying to find her way out of the mall as well. She also seems to have opened up a vent and fell down, to which we follow behind. But only to find her flashlight laying on the ground, no sign of her anywhere. The only thing nearby is a trail of black goo leading up the wall with a child's handprint stamped next to its entrance. So the Runaway Kid does what we would have done and grabs the flashlight and runs. The Ghost Child is another unfortunate story we learn about through the digital comics. They are a skinny child with pale skin who wears a white sheet draped over their head. They're completely barefooted and have holes in the sheet for each of their arms. We find them scavenging for food in the Pale City's apartments. They're sifting through dirty plates with two viewers close by glued to a TV in the background. The Ghost Child notices a cage covered in blood with footprints leading to a nearby wardrobe. The Ghost Child opens it to reveal an injured rat. In an honest attempt to save the rat, they carry it to a nearby window, only to realize it's too high. And the rat has succumbed to its wounds in their arms. To top it off, they don't hear the TV in the background anymore. The viewers have closed in on them, and they're trapped between the viewers and a long fall. When the mobile game Very Little Nightmares was released, we were introduced to the girl in the yellow raincoat. We presumed that this girl was 6, but at the climax of the game, it was revealed to be a different character altogether. Like the other children, she's small, very small, a somewhat tan skin tone, and at the end of the game, it's revealed that she has long brown hair braided and tied with a red headband. The girl in the yellow raincoat never talks, and all we really know about her is her strong desire to escape the nest. The house in the sky very little nightmares is set in. We can say she is smart and demonstrates skills like solving puzzles and finding weaknesses in enemies. Toward the end of the game, as the main antagonist, the Pretender, chases her down a rocky cliffside, she notices a little girl in white clothes dangling from an adjacent cliff. With just a little time at her disposal, she uses it to knock down a tree to make a bridge for the girl in white, saving her. It's not long until the girl in white tries to repay her though. She pushes a large boulder down onto the Pretender right at the last second as she leaps toward the girl in the yellow raincoat, but it also breaks the ground from under both of them. They fall all the way down to the ocean, only for the ending screen to show up, and only the raincoat floats to the surface. A lot of theories point to the girl in white being 6, and when Mono and her come across the very same jacket in the Pale City, she puts it on, maybe with the intention of carrying on her hero's legacy. What do you think? Who is the girl in the yellow raincoat? Did she live? Cici is the counselor's, Otto's, sister, someone he has been trying to track down for his entire life. There's no description of her throughout the entire podcast, except that her and Otto look nothing alike. There is a moment where Noone brings up a yellow raincoat, and Otto jumps at the mention of it, raising the question of who the original owner of the raincoat could be, and if it implies that either Cici was the original owner, if she is the girl in the yellow raincoat, or if she is 6. Although Cici had accepted to remain in the Nowhere, her identity and final fate within the Nowhere remains unknown. Otto eventually reveals Cici had nightmares similar to Noone's. She even recounted stories of meeting the Candleman, also known as the Ferryman, and Cici was taken across the threshold when she was a little girl. Ever since, Otto has been trying to find a way to get her back. The Bullies are proof that not all kids are innocent. They are minor enemies found in the school during Little Nightmares 2, and they are mean. They are all scrawny, wiry children with a little bit more height than any of our other kids. They dress in 1950s British school boy and girl outfits and have large porcelain heads. Some have heads that are even cracked open to reveal they are completely hollow, and they're definitely empty-headed. They rarely speak, but they are complete troublemakers. They attack anything in sight, even each other. They're rowdy, disobedient, and hyperactive. If they see you, they will not stop until they've gotten their hands on you or their head is smashed. The only time they behave is when the teacher is nearby. They become rigid from fear, but will still attack if the teacher orders it. One of the first times Noone tells Otto about her dreams in The Sounds of Nightmares is an instance where she recalls crawling downwards in a small passageway in the walls of the Stone Giant, a giant structure in her dream. After a long day of crawling through the walls, Noone takes a moment to rest when a small child reveals themselves from another corridor. It was dark, but they had a black liquid moving like smoke covering their whole head. Noone couldn't make out any features, but they stood there in silence for a moment, just looking at each other. When Noone finally opens her mouth to speak, the gooey-haired child covers her mouth and points to a nearby opening, to a room with a tall woman working inside. A woman wearing a nun-like dress with long, heavy chains coming out from under its tail. It's presumed that the child with gooey hair was kind, helpful, and willing to help Noone survive her stay in the Stone Giant, and they stayed quiet. But soon enough, the child would meet their end at the hand of that same tall lady after helping Noone find her way to temporary safety. The tall woman would wrap and capture them with those long chains, but we never witnessed the final fate of the child with gooey hair, so they might still be alive. The Toddler is one of my personal favorite stories, although it's very short-lived. We meet the Toddler in the digital comics as he crawls through some kind of animal's burrow in the ground. He's a toddler with nothing but a diaper and a blindfold wrapped around his head and a feather stuck into it. He carries a bundle on a stick, and he certainly seems younger than the other children in the nowhere, but he's very resourceful. We see him removing the meat from an animal's carcass and stowing it away in his bundle. Afterwards, he begins to crawl out of the hole and is just inches away when a clawed hand bursts out of one of the sides of the tunnel. Then another, and before he knows it, he's surrounded by clawing, grabbing hands pulling him back deeper and deeper into the burrow. The toddler wakes up. It was a nightmare. As he wakes up, he hears a scream coming from out of the wilderness, which leads him to a lone TV that flicks on before him. The thin man appears through the static, and the toddler is taken. Back to back, one of my favorite additions to the Little Nightmares world comes in the form of a DLC, Secrets of the Mall. You play as the Runaway Kid in a sequence of events that takes place parallel to the events Six is going through. The Runaway Kid, sometimes just the kid, was a scrawny little guy with black shaggy hair that covered his eyes. He wore what looked like a collared light blue pajama button-down, blue pants cut off right above the ankles, and a severed shackle on his right ankle. Like many of the other kids, he also doesn't have any shoes. There's nothing particularly standout about his personality, but he was willing to defend himself if the opportunity arose. Likewise, willing to help out another lost child if he could. During the trek through the mall, he encounters some of the same problems as Six, the most important being the lady, who eventually does capture him and uses her powers to turn him into a gnome. After just moments of wandering around in his new form, he finds a few other gnomes in the guest area, with a left-behind sausage on the floor. Now, there are a few other minor child characters with stories that revolve around their groups respectively, so I figure I lump them all into their own section here. After Six sneaks out of the kitchen in the 2017 comic series, she finds 5 kids huddled around a campfire in the walls, all of them hooded or covering their face in some manner. The bandaged kid, who gets eaten by a leech almost immediately upon meeting them, the boy in green, the refugee boy, the long-haired girl, and the humpback girl. The humpback girl recalls a time when her and her friends went to a dilapidated house and uncovered a room full of floor-length mirrors. Only they didn't just see their normal selves in them. The boy who got strong saw a muscular version of himself. The boy who got tall saw a 7-foot-plus version of himself. And the boy who got forked, who wished he had a twin of himself, saw just that. They all became what they saw in the mirrors, except for the last child, a young girl who refused to look at all. Eventually, tentacles would pour out from the mirrors, attempting to pull each of the children inside. And thinking quickly, the little girl used herself as bait for the tentacles, while the other children smashed the mirrors. This presumably killed the monster, but in turn, left the girl horribly disfigured. Her friends promised to come back for her, but never did. The ferryman found her and took her across the threshold. She covered herself with a brown sheet of some sort, and thus, the humpback girl was thrown into the nowhere. The carnival is said to be a massive ship in the sky. Clouds passing by and wind in the sails held by giant wooden masts. Here, a group of performers entertain the carnival people, another type of monstrous, disfigured humanoids who attend the performing children's show in the big top tent. This group of children are actually the only ones we have learned about that identify as teenagers, except for one, Rusty, a younger performer who asks Noone to help them escape at a particular moment in the show, a moment that would be enough to distract the man who forces them to perform, the man in the purple suit. These kids do everything from juggling to fire breathing to disappearing acts. Kids who find their way into the nowhere have lived horrible, nasty, and torturous lives. When they endure enough, the ferryman seems to find them and offers them an outstretched hand, an option to leave their world behind for another. If you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing, it really helps. And let me know down in the comments what you think about all the children we meet in this crazy, nightmarish world. Until next time, peace.